Good morning, everybody. You got your Self Shift crew back for another early Sunday morning podcast. Cold winter day here in mid-January. So let's go ahead and go around the room. You got Patrick.
Doug.
Derrick, hey everyone.
All right. And we've got an interesting subject today, psychological flexibility. So I know that sounds like a bit of a fancy term, psychological flexibility. What does it really mean? But let me kind of set the stage. And this is something that I've been practicing for many years, and it's been a great benefit to me. But a lot of us, many of us spend enormous amounts of energy trying to feel better before we can actually live our lives, right? And if you're somebody like me who grew up in an environment where you were told to push things down, man, don't feel it, don't express emotions, just push it down. It was a model in which we didn't express emotions, we suppressed emotions, right? And people wait for anxiety to settle or motivation to appear or clarity to arrive as opposed to accepting what is and moving forward. And that really is the key concept of psychological flexibility because life doesn't pause until we feel ready. So let's do a quick second and kind of define what we mean by psychological flexibility in specific terms, because again, a bit of a fancy terminology there. It's not just about positivity. It's not about emotional control. It's not about just pushing through. It's about staying present, about what's happening internally, what's happening in the moment, right? Allowing thoughts and emotions to come through without fighting them, right? Pushing them down. You're actually making room for them to be present, sitting with them, and then taking committed action based upon your core values. Now, psychological flexibility is often associated with acceptance and commitment therapy. Since none of us on the call here are clinicians, we're not coming at this from a clinical perspective. We're coming at it from a practical perspective. So many years ago, when I kind of started down the journey of self-reflection and self-development, studying Stoicism and Buddhism and other things, including acceptance and commitment therapy and cognitive behavioral therapy, not from a clinical perspective, but from a self-guided perspective, I came up with a concept of what I call accept and go. Basically, accepting what is, realizing it's here. Doesn't mean it's okay. Doesn't mean it's good. Doesn't mean you're approving it, but it is here. Accepting it, being curious about it, and moving into it with action based upon committed values, right? Or committed action based upon your values is the way I would say it. And of course, we can never start these podcasts without a bit of a series of quotes. So I've got a couple, and I'm sure that we probably have commingled these before. And this is from Marcus Aurelius, one of the great Stoics. If it's endurable, then endure it. Stop complaining. And another one from Carl Jung, what you resist persists. So I'm going to pause there. Derrick, your thoughts?
Yeah, as we open up this morning, it, I can just relate to this topic from just lived experience of navigating life and the journey. And, we all go through hard times, we go through challenges, we go through things that happen to us that's unfair. And we basically react to the world from that lens and we interact with others. And so as you go on the journey and you have hard times and hardships and you navigate that, you come into new perspectives, I think, as you go forward and you age in life and you have different experiences and get different trainings and get different understandings of what's out there to help evolve you as a human being. And I think that just coming into that perspective, from that perspective, is the journey of getting new tools in your arsenal to help you evolve to the best human being as you possibly can be. I think that relevant to this topic, one thing that stands out to me is a quote by Eckhart Tolle is the moment that you're aware that you're breathing is the moment you're present. And I think there's a high degree of being present and coming into that awareness and that perspective around this topic. And so looking forward to diving into this further with us today.
Great setup. Doug?
Yeah, just to, break the fourth wall of our podcast here, when you scheduled this as the theme, I had no idea what psychological flexibility was. So, it forced me to go do a little bit of research and try to get an understanding. At first, I was like, is this just about resilience? But then, as I looked at it, I saw that it really touches on several themes that we often speak about here as a package, really, right? So, making sure you're kind of aware of your values, making sure you're kind of making choices based on your values and aligning to your values. But, we've had episodes about acceptance, accept so you can feel and those kind of things. So, definitely was a good thing for me to have the opportunity to kind of relook at some of these aspects. One of the big things I think you went you mentioned it was um, kind of being present and recognizing that you're having thoughts. Like, again, so we often talk about mindfulness, and mindfulness gives you that opportunity to maybe step back and recognize instead of react, respond instead of react. Um, and so a big part for me was like, a big part of this for me was realizing that in order to kind of be the observer, to view, self as context or cognitive diffusion or whatever, you have to be able to catch yourself and then think about, wait, is this just a story I'm telling myself? Or is this just a difficult emotion I'm trying to suppress? Like you were saying, you have to like step away from it and view it so that you can kind of decide how to react to it. So, again, for me, it was a bit of a learning journey, which is always good. You said it yourself. I had to be curious about it and then be curious, not judgmental, is one of the comments you made. But my quote that I'll bring here, which I think is a really good representation of this sort of theme, is you can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf. And that's John Kabat-Zinn. I don't know, not somebody I know. But anyways, that's my quote on this
He's the
topic.
grandfather of mindfulness meditation. So he wrote the book on it, man. So he's the grandfather. You clicked on something that is just so important, right? And is the key, I think, to all of this, and that's observing what's happening, right? For me, this was the key in the sense that I'm going to walk through the process that I do with I call it accept and go, right? Because again, not a clinician, but I do self-guided psychological flexibility. I practice it every day of my life. And I call it accept and go because I needed something simple the framework that I can employ whenever I need to. And it just kind of goes together. It sounds pretty cool, like accept and go. I'm going to throw curiosity in there as well. And I'll give you an example of just how I use this in a daily basis, right? And again, acceptance is not approval, but it's recognizing what is. And so recently I was doing a really big presentation for a large group of folks at work, right? And I do suffer from anxiety, including social anxiety. I've gotten better over time, especially with this practice. But there's about a quarter-mile walk from the hotel to the office building, right? And as I was walking over there, I felt a sensation of, what if I say something stupid, or what if I forget to, whatever. And I immediately started employing the methodology of, I am having the thought that I'm anxious. I am having the thought that I'm anxious. I'm observing that thought. The thought is not me. I'm having the thought that I'm anxious. So from that point, I'm now observing it. To your point, diffusing it. I'm not the thought. I'm diffused from the thought. And then I make room for it to come in. Oh, this is anxiety. This is anxiety. What does anxiety feel like? Oh, let me get curious about this. Oh, it kind of feels like a little pressure in the head here. My stomach feels a bit odd. But just exploring that from the perspective of curiosity. And then within just a couple of minutes, I'm like, I'm good, right? I didn't eliminate the anxiety completely, but I accepted it. And the fact that I'm giving the presentation, I prepped for it. I've got my notes. I've vetted those notes with people. Everybody seems to be in alignment with him. I'm taking committed action. So I'm going to go up on the stage. If I say something goofy, like I do on a frequent basis, that's okay, right? I can accept that. So that's a very practical example of what I call accept and go, or Patrick's or self-shift's, representation of psychological flexibility. And you can use that anywhere. For example, even in an uncomfortable meeting situation, like Doug, you were, describing earlier before the call started, like if there's a situation and somebody is being, I don't know, inappropriate or aggressive or whatever, accepting, I'm having the thought that somebody is being aggressive, or that I'm being attacked, or that I'm being put on the spotlight, or whatever. Okay, what does that feel like? Let's accept that. Don't try to suppress it. Don't push it down, but process it and deal with it, and then take committed action based upon your values, which in my case, I'm not an aggressive person. So I respond with, hey, how can we make this better? Am I doing something that's offending you or whatever? So, Derrick, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, as you were sharing there, I just come up with a little analogy of like a rubber band. You think about what a rubber band is to, different uses in the world. Well, if you take a rubber band and you stretch it out, that's tension. And I think that when you feel that tension, in that rubber band in the moment, you become aware of it. And so if there's, you know, on the flip side of that, if you take a rubber band and you relax it, you become this open, just flexible, you know, band. And I think that when you relate that to your life, what you were sharing, Patrick, is, you recognize that tension that came, that anxiety, those thoughts. And in that moment, you were able to decipher them. You were able to look at it and apply the techniques of what we're talking about today. You basically become aware of them and you processed them in a way that led you out of that tension. And it's the same concept as like, it's evolving to a flexibility within yourself through awareness, presence, processing emotion. And I think the big thing too is you allowed yourself to be where you are. You didn't make it wrong. And I think that's very important is when an emotion comes, a feeling of anxiety or depression or anger or madness that's deep within, it's okay. Don't make it wrong. Let's sit with it. Let's process it through our tools, through our techniques of this, cognitive therapy we're talking about. And let's like move on. Let's get into a different perspective to be able to assess what is and move on. And I think that is very, very practical way of approaching exactly aligned to this topic today and the way you evolved that and a great example.
Yeah, to double click on something you said there, Derek, very critical is take some committed action, even if it's really small, some committed action. Doug.
Yeah, I actually want to build on what you were talking about as far as anxiousness with presentation and things like that. And I think it touches on acceptance, it touches on cognitive diffusion, it touches on committed action. But, I used to be a guy that felt like I needed to eliminate stress from my life. So it was all about repressing or suppressing stress and saying, wherever there's stress, and it became an avoidance thing, so it wasn't about actually solving for the stress. It was about like suppressing it and avoiding it and making sure I'm not in a situation that could be stressful and those kind of things. But exactly where you are about like doing presentations for large groups, I used to be crazy anxious. Like one time I was giving a presentation, you could hear in my voice like I was nervous and cracking, and I got people reaching out afterwards and saying like, you know your stuff, why are you nervous, and those kind of things. But so a few years back, there was a presentation for the board of directors for the company that we work with, and I was having the worst freak out of my life because I was like, I shouldn't be here presenting. This is crazy and all that kind of stuff. But it just so happened that I was listening to a audiobook at the time, Kelly McGonigal, The Upside of Stress. And, she was talking about, like, it starts out talking about a study that was done that showed it wasn't the stress itself that hurt people's health. It was their feeling about stress. So if they felt like stress is bad for you, it made it worse. It magnified and amplified the results on your physiological self. But those that understood stress as part of life and stress like as an evolutionary thing that says, hey, you're in a bad situation, you need to react. And here's, kind of pushing you to react and giving you the adrenaline to react and all those kind of things. But, she was talking about you should embrace stress and you should view stress in a more positive outlook. Well, part of that was she used the example of public speaking or presenting. And she was like, you actually have to step back and look at it and say, yes, you're anxious. Yes, you're nervous, but that's actually the good part of stress. You're excited. You're excited to share what you know with a group of people. You know more. There's a reason they're asking you to come present because you know what you're presenting on and they want to hear from you. Literally, like going into the presentation with the board of directors, in my mind I was telling myself, I'm excited. I'm excited to share what I've worked on putting together and all those kind of things. So like the committed action was committing myself to be excited about going there. And honestly, since that presentation, every presentation since has been a little easier. So it's really, accepting stress, observing the stress, observing how I was feeling about it, not judging or whatever. And then, reframing or committing myself to be excited to go present. Sorry for that long-winded thing. But.
No, that was great. And I will say I had the honor of being at that presentation with Doug, who absolutely knows his stuff. I can tell you that straight up. And he did a fantastic job. I still remember that day as crystal as like it was yesterday. So that was a really good thing. And you nailed it, man. So your practice certainly works. And you also hit on something really, really key, which is the opposite of logical or the psychological inflexibility, which is the opposite, right? And a couple of terms that you said there, avoidance, and that was my calling card for many, many years. Just avoid it, right? Rumination, waiting to feel ready, letting discomfort decide your life. Because accept and go or a psychological flexibility, whichever term you want to use, doesn't mean that you eliminate the anxiety or the discomfort. It means you learn to live with it and learn to live your life, right? Because you're observing it. So you're going into something as opposed to rumination. You're not resisting. You're not judging. You're not staying stuck, right? The opposite of this accept and go or psychological flexibility is resist and stay stuck. Derrick.
Yeah. And, think about it from like, as you think about suppression, every one of us has heard the saying, "Oh, just sweep it under the rug." Think about trying to sweep dirt under a rug or versus sweeping dirt off the porch, which is easier. And so when you think of it like, when you're trying to suppress things, you're trying to cover things up, you're trying to avoid things, you're trying to sweep it under the rug in a sense, just nearly impossible. And that is the way you live your life, is from that impossible perspective. And when you just like let it go and sweep it off the porch, sweep the dirt, sweep the negativity, sweep the, what it is that's no longer serving your best interest, sweeping it off the porch is the moment you are able to open up and recognize and be free and not live from that strain of resistance and trying to hide it and trying to cover it up, trying to suppress it. And it just lets you open up and be free. It's just like a feeling of release that happens in your body. And so I would just say that it's well worth the journey of not resisting anymore to actually release that weight of whatever it is that's binding you up in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to do a quick comparison between the concepts of psychological flexibility versus inflexibility, right? In psychological flexibility, you accept what is. Doesn't mean you approve of it. Doesn't mean it's necessarily good, but you accept what's happened or what is, as opposed to trying to negotiate with the past or whatever. In psychological inflexibility, you resist it or avoid it, right? So accept versus resistance and avoidance. In psychological flexibility, you become curious. What does this feel like? Oh, this feels like this. Versus in psychological inflexibility, you judge it. You believe it, like Doug was saying. You're judging yourself or judging the emotion. And in psychological flexibility, you take committed action, you go, right? Even if it's a small step versus freezing or escaping or avoiding in psychological inflexibility. So, in a quick, three-row, table, that's the way that I think about it.
You
Doug.
got to add one part to your accept and go, and that
Yep.
is like recognize accept and go, because
Yes.
you can't accept it until you're able to step back and observe and realize I'm doing the rumination thing, or I'm telling myself a story that isn't true based on nothing. There, like if I really analyze this, that there's nothing behind this fear or anxiety that I'm having in reality, if I look at reality. But yeah, first you got to recognize it so you can accept it, and then you can go.
No, that's super key. And there's a book that I read. It's down here. Actually, no, it's one of Dr. Judd Brewer's books. And to your point, the RAIN methodology, right, which is recognize for R, recognize what's happening. I'm having the thought, and then accept it. I'm having the thought, and I'm making room. I'm expanding to accept that emotion, whether it's anxiety or something like that. You're investigating it, right? You're becoming curious about it. And then I can't remember what the N is. I think no or something like that. But it's a very similar model. But you're exactly right. You can't accept until you recognize what's happening and position that as an observer. Good point, Derek.
Yeah, I think that it all starts back with like getting yourself into that space to recognize you have to become aware. And, you hear that thing when people say, well, take a breath, when you're upset or you're distraught or, breathing is a way that you can like actually connect with yourself in the moment and see what it is that's going on inside yourself. I would just say as part of like recognizing is if you find yourself in a tough situation, you're spinning per se, and you can't bring yourself out of it. just focus on your breathing for just a moment and just like get really connected with your breathing and feel that energy of your breath. And that's how you bring yourself into a state of recognition or a state of awareness, that state of presence, which is that key component of that moment of you, in a sense, drawing a line in the sand and saying, "Hey, I need to recognize what's going on here," and then be able to step into that space of that energy to be able to move beyond it. Because if
Yeah.
you can't, step into that energy, there's no way you're ever going to be able to move through that energy.
Yeah, totally agree. And there's actually like a 3-minute exercise that people can do. And it's based upon exactly what you just said, is that you're pausing and taking a breath, right? You're recognizing the in breath and breathing out, right? Just doing that, just observing the breath, right? And then getting curious, right? Curious about if you have a thought, you're observing the thought and being curious as opposed to fusing with it, right? And then determining what matters right now, right? Should I do based upon the core values, based upon who I am? Now, that was a super high level. I think in a future video, we've talked about this before. We do need to double click on some more of the practices about how we actually implement these things. I think we did a pretty good job of giving some practical examples today, but even if as it relates to meditation and that type of thing. So, again, you don't need to practice this to feel better. You practice this to live better, right?
Right.
Teaching folks or becoming aware of actually how to live. Recognize, accept, be curious, take committed action. All right. With that said, I think we are probably close to wrapping this up. A couple of key thoughts from my side. Again, discomfort is part of being human. I think in today's world, we sometimes forget that humans have difficult emotions and have anxiety and have fear because of evolution, right? As we evolved, from the evolutionary biology, right? These emotions are meant to help keep us alive. So that's part of being human. Avoidance shrinks life. If you live your life from an avoidance perspective, becomes you get tighter, right? Trust me, I've tried it. Flexibility expands it, and I don't fight what's here. I get curious, recognize, accept, and go. Doug,
Yeah, I mean, I'll just quickly say, I think rumination is kind of a problem for me, like a negative thought spiral, right? And like, so the thing I would say is, where was I going with this? Our brain is meant to think. Our brain is meant to have thoughts. Our brain is meant to like look at the present, think about the past, and all these different things, and just have thoughts. And so, a key thing that we've talked about today is being able to step back and observe and recognize these are just thoughts. And again, rumination is something I'm constantly kind of working on, is like recognizing that, and then trying to look at the reality of what's going on in my daily life and say, like, these are just thoughts and they're not real in terms of what I'm worrying about. So, just take time to step back when you're having really negative thoughts and think about, is this real? And as part of this whole psychological flexibility thing.
yep. And just to double click on that is keep in mind your brain is designed to keep you alive. Your brain is not designed to make you happy. So
Yeah.
that's why these approaches really work.
And just on top of that, just as part of that, be kind to yourself. Okay.
I needed to hear that, man. Derrick,
Yeah, just, here's one couple of things. Just as you think, so are you. So are you. So your great self has the ability to shift your thoughts from that negative state, that negative emotion into something positive for yourself. And it comes with you deciding to make that shift. And here we are at Self Shift today talking about this. So I just want to encourage everyone listening that you have the ability and the power within yourself to shift yourself into a whole new space and framework around psychological flexibility and getting control of yourself and your emotions and being able to move forward in a positive way in your life.
yep, agreed. The only way out is through. So I would encourage our listeners today, as you go through your day, right? To Doug's point, recognize what's happening, focus on what you can accept, what you can be curious about, and what you can do to move forward, even if it's one small step. And always remember, be curious, not judgmental. Have a great week.